Squadron, scramble!
Well, the Battle of Britain is history. Kids in school, they're learning about the Battle of Britain in part of their history lessons. And there are still chaps around, old and round the bend like myself, who are alive and they can touch and see and hear.
When the fitters went down first thing in the morning, before they came on readiness, they were probably on a quarter of an hour standby. Well, all the running up and testing and checking of the engines and airframes, that would be done then, what they call the daily inspection.
What's become known as the Battle of Britain was in fact fought between the Royal Air Force and the German Luftwaffe between July and October 1940. The Royal Air Force were defending Britain with Hurricanes and Spitfires, single-seater fighters, and the Germans had all their twin-engine bombers, which were Heinkel 111s, Dornier 17s, Junkers 88s, protected by the short-range Messerschmitt 109, which had about 45 minutes flight duration.
Morning, sir.
Morning, Williams.
Nice cup of tea, sir.
Normally I woke up very tired by some most unpleasant but delightful chap's batman who would say, "Oh, come on, sir, you've got to bed late." He'd pick up my clothes, he'd plonk them somewhere, and you'd say, "Oh, push off." And he'd say, "No, sir." Then you get out, you put your clothes on, and it was still dark. And then you wait, because 1940 was a wonderful summer, if you remember. It was all in the attacker's side. That summer of 1940 was brilliant. It was red hot.
I can't remember who it was who said my country right or wrong. And I think that's the way we felt about it, my country right or wrong. We were still British, and we were fighting for Britain. Our way of life, our physical ownership of the land, we weren't going to have Germans or anybody else owning it.
could see the enemy, you could see what he was doing. Everybody on the ground could see it as well. And it was a national effort. We all wanted to get rid of these bastards who are going to come and bomb us and then land and then do all the things that they've been doing in Europe with the occupied countries.
We used to, in fact, get up at about 3:30 in the morning. It was unbelievable. And we'd get to the airfield, I suppose, round about 4-ish. You were in full flying kit, except your helmet, parachute. And you were meant to be in your cockpits and airborne within 3 minutes of the alarm going. And really the day consisted of getting up some unholy hour, being driven down to dispersal, sitting in a chair, waiting for the telephone to go, drinking the odd cup of tea, reading books, nodding off, playing cards. And 3 or 4 times a day, the telephone would go and off you'd go.
And when the telephone rang, there was a telephone orderly who answered it, and the absolute silence that descended upon a dispersal hut. I think a lot of fighter pilots don't like telephones to this day as a result. I'm one of them.
If they said that bandits, as they were called in those days, were approaching Maidstone from the southeast, which they might well happen, Angels 15, one wouldn't go straight down to Maidstone. At least I wouldn't. I would fly north, gaining height as much as I could, and then turn round so that one could try and get them head on.
You'll be up there, you're listening to your controller on the ground, you're in your tight little office, listening like a hawk and watching like a hawk. And the sun position always to us was of vital importance. And then as you turn and dive, when you take your decision, then you're committed, everybody is. And then the shooting starts and then whoosh, it's all over the sky.
Fighting is impersonal because you're not thinking of people. You really aren't thinking when you see something in your sights that really isn't one man or 5 men if it's a bomber or whatever it is. It's a target.
I always went for the pilot. So he's the man controlling the aeroplane, and he had to be destroyed.
When I shot an aeroplane, I wanted to shoot the aeroplane down. I didn't give a damn whether the fellow bailed out or not.
All to me was that aircraft will do damage. Now, at it, quick, best, as many as you can, as quick as you can.
I read books now which says the Hurricane was not as manoeuvrable as the 109. Well, I know very well that it is, because I could manoeuvre it and did manoeuvre it.
But a Spitfire was a really beautiful little aeroplane. Your gun button was on your stick. We had 8 Browning machine guns. We had about 15 seconds of fire if you were to press them and keep them on, which you wouldn't. You seldom fired more than a 2 or 3 second burst at a time.
The Spitfire was a most beautiful thing to fly. It glided through the sky. And the Hurricane seemed to be driven through the sky, and the Spitfire was to glide. And the Germans were much more frightened of the Spitfire than the Hurricane. I think they were wrong, because the aeroplane which did more damage to them was the Hurricane, because the gun platform of the Hurricane was magnificent.
No comparison. The Hurricane was a cab horse, and the Spitfire was a racehorse.
Effectively, radar consisted of bouncing waves from the ground against objects in the sky and reading what came back. That meant that for the most part, your controller could tell you where the enemy was, at what height he was, though this was often rather less accurate than the location, and from which direction he was coming, and approximately the size of his force.
From the controller's angle, we had extremely good early warning, and that, of course, was passed from the radar stations on the coast to the filter room up at Fighter Command, and then out to the sectors, where they were then displayed on a plotting table, which was manned by WAFs.
During the height of the raids, we were getting as much as 5 plots through on one raid, and you might have been plotting 3 raids at one time, so you had to be very slick. Everyone was calling out, either asking for symbols to be brought, or calling out to the tote that they had a new raid and information on that particular raid. And at certain times, the ACAC people were calling out and shouting fire. And of course the teleprinters were ticking, tick, 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 tick. You know the noise they make. So when I see the films and see the WAFs, with great dignity pushing the croupiers and that, just isn't it?
She'll be skidding down the runway when she comes. She'll be skidding down the runway when she comes. She'll be skidding down the runway, skidding down the runway, skidding down the runway when she comes. Singing aye aye yippee yippee aye, singing aye aye yippee yippee aye, singing aye aye yippee aye aye yippee, singing aye aye yippee yippee aye.
Sometimes they would come back off a sweep, or sorted with the enemy, that they would jump out and they'd be full of life and anxious to get back. And then other times you'd get them come back, they wouldn't even want to get out the cockpit. They'd sit there in a sort of a moody type of fashion while they were being refuelled and rearmed.
The pilots get all the credit. The ground crew were very highly skilled to begin with. They were most of them pre-war regulars, and they were of very remarkable skills. They knew and indeed loved their individual aircraft and their engines. They worked the sort of hours per day that most people now work per week. They were totally reliable. The number of times you didn't worry about engine failure, you worried about the enemy, but you didn't worry about engine failure. And the closer the rapport was with your ground crew, from the NCO down to the man who pumped up the tires, the better it was for everybody. It gave you confidence, it gave them encouragement to know that they were appreciated.
It's a long while ago now, but I can still see them just working away there, real characters in their way. I had a sergeant that Slater, his name, always walked around, always had a long dust coat on right down to his ankles. Why he did it, I don't know. And he used to just walk around, and one of the spanners that was in a lot of use on the Merlin engine was a 2BA, and there'd be a fitter fumbling around, and he'd say, "What do you want, a 2BA?" And he'd group his hand down into the bottom of his pocket. Things like that, just went along quietly, nobody getting panicky.
I've had to run for it when I've actually been refuelling, and these aircraft have come over and they've been strafing and dropping their bombs and so forth. 1 minute you find yourself refuelling an aircraft, and next minute you're running for it, and the next thing you find you're all talking about it. It was over in such a short space of time.
Ever since the day is spawning much too early in the morning. Someone wakes you shivering, yawning, sleepy little head. Back upon the pillow falling, can't you hear a voice a-calling? It's the stars that just be falling, stand beside your bed. Rise and shine, ain't it fine? You gotta get up before you know what it's all about.
We had deck chairs. I remember they were terribly useful things, deck chair. You could sleep on those. Or you just lie on the grass, because it was a beautiful summer. It was lovely weather. And one was able to just sleep.
Well, yes, I could beat the intelligence officer, who was an Oxford Don, so I liked playing chess with him. But you had to do something when you were hanging around waiting for the telephone to ring and order you into the air. So you played chess, and chaps played poker, and that sort of thing. You had to while away the time. A lot of waiting in war. It's not all action.
I used to read whodunits, because I'm no intellect. Play cards occasionally, but I'm not much of a card player. We also did a bit of skeet shooting, where they gave us regulation single-barrel 12 bores and a clay pigeon trap. So we used to do a bit of skeet shooting around the back. But mainly, really, just gossiping, sitting around, nodding off, because you didn't get very much sleep. Certainly first thing in the morning when you got down there, one would nod off right away, because one was half asleep anyhow. If you had a hangover, you'd go and have a whiff of oxygen. And the squadron MO used to come round with a big pail of hangover mixture, which I remember vividly, tasting of SR toothpaste, which is probably all it was.
And we were playing rounders one afternoon, and an aeroplane came over the top, and we looked up and said, "Oh, that's Blenheim." And the thing dropped a stick of bombs right across the airfield. And we hadn't had any warning at all. And we rushed to the telephone. I said, "What the hell's going on?" to the control people. And they said, "Well," we said, "we've just had a stick of bombs across the airfield." It was a Ju-88. They looked very similar, actually. The next time, Blenheim came over, and we all took off.
If the tannoy came on and no one spoke, I could be sick before he'd had time to talk.
If you're flying an aircraft, there's a certain amount of kick out of shooting somebody else down, because it's an object that you're knocking down. It's like a little boy knocking a pile of bricks down that he's just built into a house. That's as I view it anyway.
One thing I was told, if you're on your own, and this was one of the chaps on the squadron, a chap called William McKnight, who sadly was killed, a Canadian, and he said, "Now, if you're on your own, for God's sake, look around the sky and join up with somebody." And we ran into some 109s, and the whole milling of aircraft went on, and I found myself entirely on my own. So I spied an airplane and immediately joined up with it, looking round everywhere, and I suddenly discovered I joined up with the 109, and we both saw each other at the same time.
Wakefield, on his first fight, he got his hand shot off. And on the radio we heard, "My hand shot, I think I'm going to make it." And then he went straight in because the shock and the loss of blood killed him. These kids with literally no experience.
I was so young then, I think one was trying to keep away from those bloody guns he had in front of it. You know, one didn't want to get killed or hit or anything like that, but I certainly wasn't fighting a man, if anything, a machine. You also had to have a lot of luck. There's a lot of bullets flying around from various directions, and if not from the chap who possibly was firing at you, or somebody might have been firing from the side. A lot of people got killed just flying into crossfire. if there was a bit of hot stuff going around. But it sounds a bit facetious, but I really don't think that one was frightened at that age. I mean, now I'd be bloody terrified, but, it was a sort of a cowboys and Indians sort of thing.
The typical injury of the fighter pilot, who normally flew at high altitude, was burning, which is, of course, perhaps the most painful thing that one can sustain. And one saw a lot of one's friends being burnt. Rather appallingly, occasionally you heard them being burnt because their radio was left on when they started being burnt. You could hear them screaming.
Next thing I knew, there was a shattering crash. The whole of the instrument panel disappeared in front of my eyes into little bits. And in the hurricane, just the other side of the instrument panel, between the instrument panel and the engine, was the reserve petrol tank, which held about 28 gallons of petrol. And the cannon shells and rifle caliber bullets from the ME-110's machine guns went straight through the instrument panel into the petrol tank, which burst into flames, landing there for about 28 gallons of petrol in my lap. I immediately thought to myself, this is it. And then pulled myself together very quickly, released the harness, which held me into the seat, and I pushed the stick straight forward, so the aircraft dived down and went over the vertical. I'd already got the cockpit hood locked open, as was my custom, and so the centrifugal force just flung me straight out. And my clothes were on fire, most of my trousers had been burned off, and I was in a pretty uncomfortable state. And I thought to myself, I won't release my parachute while my clothes are burning, just in case the parachute should catch fire, which would not be good. So I waited for a moment or two until everything went cold, by which time I'd fallen, I don't know, a couple of thousand feet perhaps. And then I pulled the ripcord and was very thankful when the parachute opened. And then I found that I couldn't see, because having been unable to get a new pair of goggles after breaking my original pair the day before, I'd been burned over the face and my eyelids were all glued together. And the next thing I heard was the unmistakable noise of an ME-109 approaching. They had a different engine led to the Hurricane and the Spitfire. And I thought to myself, my God, this fellow's going to shoot me. And apparently that is exactly what he intended to do. But one of our sergeant pilots, whose name was Robinson, saw this, and he attacked this 109, and he fired a burst well ahead of it, so that the enemy pilot could see the tracer going past him, and it caused him to sheer off. And all I could do was hear this. I heard it going on, and I've never been so frightened in my life at any other time, because there I was, a dangling target. After that, the noise of aeroplanes and battle rapidly disappeared, and I went on going down. Then I thought I don't particularly want to hit the ground with my eyes closed, and so I managed to fiddle about with my fingers and prise my eyelids open and take a quick look at myself, which are not a very pleasant sight, my legs and so on. And then I looked down and I saw a large wood. And I thought the scrubby end of an oak tree with burned legs and that sort of thing was also not going to be very nice, but there was nothing I could do about it. And I went on down, and very fortunately for me, immediately underneath me appeared a little tiny clearing in the wood, a little grass clearing, and I went straight into the middle of it without touching a tree at all. And it was so small that the canopy of my parachute got caught in the branches coming down, and I landed in a sitting position, as though I'd jumped off a wall, and didn't even fall over, which was probably a good thing, because I was pretty raw, and I didn't want to get bits of twig and mud and things into my burns. And having done that, I thought, well, I can do no more than wait. I was pretty shaken, and my hands are not much use, because I'd been burned all around the wrists, and I thought I'd wait for the Home Guard to approach, and eventually heard crashing noises coming through the undergrowth, So I called out, "I'm over here and I'm British." And a reassuring voice cried, "All right, mate, we're coming." And so that was that.
We are Mackinto's army, we are his guinea pigs, with dermatomes and pectacles, glass eyes, false teeth and wigs. But when we get a discharge, we'll shout with all our might, Peradua ad astra, we'd rather drink than fight.
It was the most wonderful place, and a marvellous chap called Archie McIndoe, who was the great surgeon. And they had this hospital at East Grinstead, where all the burns were taken care of. And they were remarkable people. They formed themselves into a club called the Guinea Pigs. And some were terribly badly burnt. In fact, some really had, I suppose, new faces. I mean, old Archie would sort of pull a bit off and then roll it up and stick it on your face as a nose, or roll it up and make it into a ear or something.
And if their hands aren't steady, they'll decapitate your head.
We had a very, very badly burned young pilot, so badly burned that it was almost impossible to pick him up for a bedpan or anything like that. You could only just get him under the armpits and perhaps by his heels. And he had a huge cage over his legs to protect them from the sheets and that sort of thing. And we also had a nurse on the ward, a very nice soul, but hideous, with, and I imagine she must have had a wig, because she had the Red Cross, you know, usual white thing with the Red Cross on it, and then this huge bunch of yellow curls in front, and permanently buck teeth covered in lipstick. She was a very, very kind soul. Well, this actually, it happened to my sister. I was there, but it happened to my sister. This boy wanted a bedpan. So my sister said I was doing some dressings, and my sister said to this woman as she was passing, "Would you help me? I've got to get Peter onto the bedpan." "Yes, of course," she said. So together, my sister moved the cage, and we used to use not lavatory paper, but a thing called tow, which is gold in colour, you see. She put the tow on the cage that she'd moved. They got Peter onto the bedpan, and everything happened in the normal course of events. And then my sister and this woman helping her they lifted him, you see, got the bedpan away, and my sister leaned over to get the tow and to clean him up, properly, and found some resistance, so she went on pulling. And she had pulled off this woman's wig and was about to wipe his bottom with this, what she thought was the tow, with the Red Cross hat on it. Well, he laughed so much, this boy, he hardly moved a muscle for about, over a month. We thought he was dying. He laughed so much, we had to give him morphia. Deep sedation he had to have, because he went on laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing, and we thought he'd die of that. But it was a turning point.
Right, feeling. Anything to do.
There's an officer's mess, it's probably gone now, but it was at Westgate. They were pilots attached to Manston, and all over the ceiling there were black footmarks, hundreds of them. And that apparently it was a routine that when a new pilot arrived, they had a big brass tray, sort of an Indian engraved tray, and they'd put a pile of soot in the middle on a load of water and beer dregs and things, and they'd get hold of this chap, stand him in this, and then upend him, and the sooty footmarks were placed on the ceiling. And then he'd have to get up and sign it. And all over this ceiling there were footmarks with autographs on.
I think the point that is not always appreciated was how ordinary they were. There's a concept of the great fighter aces with enormous panache and long cigarette holders and probably Labradors at their heels. This is not so. My particular squadrons were full of foreigners, In my flight, there were 6 Frenchmen out of 8, and there were Canadians and Czechs and Poles.
I never remember being able to pay for drink anywhere around Horchurch or Southend.
You just couldn't pay for
You
your drink?
just couldn't pay for a drink.
They wouldn't let you?
Wouldn't let you. People were always extremely friendly. I think because we were fighters, I think they were treating, as far as I remember, all the boys in the squadron were the same. We would never go on my own. We would always go 1 or 2 together, and we were treated all the same.
Roll out the barrel, we have a barrel of fun. Roll out the barrel, we got the bliss on the run. Sing tune to roll out, we got the lot of cheer. Roll the barrel, the gang's all here.
Very often when we came off readiness, in the dark, the pubs were just closing. We'd go down to the jail inn, which was run by Biddy Dupre, a wonderful Irish woman. And as she threw the regular civilian customers out the front door, she let us in round the back.
News. Up to 10 o'clock, 175 German aircraft had been destroyed in today's raids over this country. It was costly for the German Air Force for nearly a month. In daylight raids, between 350 and 400 enemy aircraft were launched in 2 attacks against London and southeast England. About half of them were shot down. It announced that by 10 o'clock tonight, 175 raiders were known to have been destroyed by our fighters and anti-aircraft gunners.
It's wrong to assume that the 15th of September was the great critical date of the battle. It was not by a long chalk. But it's taken today as a sort of a Battle Britain Day because on that day we believed we shot down this enormous number of aircraft, 180 odd. In fact, we shot down about 60. That's very easily accountable for in a big battle. The great period of Battle Britain for the RAF was the last weekend in August. The 30th and 31st of August, they were the bloodiest days of the battle. The RAF lost 25 on the 30th and 39 on the 31st of August, a total of 64. The Germans, incidentally, did not lose as many during that critical weekend as they did on the weekend of the 15th, 16th August, which was their bloodiest day in the battle. They lost 75 on the 15th and 45 on the 16th, which meant they lost 120 aircraft in 48 hours.
But the reason we won the Battle of Britain was, in my opinion, and I'm damn sure I'm right about this, that the home team usually wins anyway, and we were fighting over England. And you could look down and you saw a little field and you knew bloody well it was a British field as opposed to a French field or a German field or a German pub or an English pub. If you got shot down and you weren't killed, you would land in your own country. And let's face it, when the Germans came over, the 109s came over, if they were fighting any distance inland, shall we say 30 miles, some clever bugger once worked out that given average sort of cruising speeds and average heights and average fuel loads, those guys had about 10 minutes at the most to do what they had to do.
Well, there were 3 phases, you will see, of the Battle of Britain. The intention of the Germans was first they attacked coastal targets, including radio direction firing, which is what we now know as radar. Then they attacked the fighter airfields with the intention of wrecking fighter command and putting them out of action. Then they finally attacked London and the docks and so on. And this was going to be followed up by their invasion across the sea.
The night's raid was sporadic. We didn't notice it much, but in the morning we heard that Bourne and Hollingsworth had been hit and John Lewis destroyed by fire. We had a record number of alarms during the day, 8 in all, from the morning reconnaissance to the curfew siren, which was the only one that really mattered. During the morning there was some kind of a battle over East London. I was on duty waiting outside Great Western House, and with a lot of office workers stood in the middle of the road, watching the fighters twisting and spiralling, leaving long trails of white in the blue sky.
September the 4th, Wednesday. Dogfights all round our aerodrome. One jerry brought down near or round Worthing way. It wobbled for miles about 200 feet up and came down in the sea, followed all the time by a Spitfire. 1347. Another plane down in flames over Lancing. Crew bailed out by parachute. It may have been one of ours. I'm not sure. 1351. Big dogfight over the road. Jerry charged at us, machine gunning, hopped behind a hedge, was closely followed by 3 Spitfires and brought down near the Shoreham golf course in flames. Clouds of smoke. 1355. Spitfire landed beside it.
I think the Germans made massive errors. They diverted some of their air attack from airfields to cities. This meant that the bombers had to be escorted by the Messerschmitt fighters that could have been tackling our Hurricanes and Spitfires. They thought that our morale would break, whereas I don't think British morale ever does break. There were several psychological errors made, and the major tactical error was the switch from attacking our airfields to attacking our cities.
When talking about the Battle of Britain, we should never forget that even the RAF's contribution was by no means fighters only. There was a lot of bomber contribution, the bombing of barges, for example, to prevent the invasion if it were to come. And the very fact that Bomber Command existed was a threat to the enemy. It wasn't only a fighter battle.
The fighter pilot in the Battle of Britain had in so many ways an easier life. There were moments of intense excitement and, if you like, intense danger, but they were interspersed, and the rest of the time you were living and eating and operating in comfort. And you think of the Battle of the Atlantic, when the Merchant Navy went through unbelievable hazards, and it was a sustained hazard. It wasn't an hour 2 or 3 times a day and then a lovely pint of beer in the local at the end of it. They were chased across, to and fro across the Atlantic. Oil tankers were going up, people were dying horrendous deaths. And it somehow has always seemed to be a bit unfair, the Battle of Britain, perhaps because it was in full view of the public. It was almost like a public entertainment. I mean, in 1940, anybody could walk out of their front door if they lived in London or Kent or anywhere around the home counties 2 or 3 times a day, and they would see the battle going on. And I think that because of this, it was much more in the forefront of everybody's mind, and I've often thought it was given a undue importance and significance, perhaps because of it.
As far as I'm concerned, it was the one battle during the whole of the last war that couldn't be lost. I mean, if we'd lost that battle, there wouldn't have been any others.
It might have been frightening, like before race is frightening, but it was very exciting. I mean, if I could go back to the Battle of Britain tomorrow, and I'm sure anybody else would say exactly the same, they would, like a flash. It was a tremendous experience. It was fighting, as far as we were concerned, at its best. It was tremendous camaraderie, and in the evening we came down, and even in spite of double summertime towards, I suppose, from September onwards, you'd be released just before 10 o'clock, which would give you time to get down to the local pub, where one was always very welcome. And it was a very exciting time.
Looking back, I wouldn't have thought now that a 20-year-old even is the slightest bit interested in it. Maybe I'm wrong. But Battle of Britain, Battle of Trafalgar, you know, how far can you go back on these things? You've got to stop it somewhere.
Do not despair for Johnny Head in Air. He sleeps as sound as Johnny underground. Fetch out no shroud for Johnny in the cloud, and keep your tears for him in after years. Better by far for Johnny the bright star to keep your head and see his children fed.
It looked like tiny little slivers of silver, little flashes of silver. They were, so tiny, so high up, and the sky was beautiful, beautiful, clear blue sky. It was marvellous. And they were weaving about and sort of, up and down. It was difficult. You couldn't, I couldn't tell which were German planes and which were English. They were so tiny and so high up, you see.
This waff is a wonderful life. Sure you might get a job as an officer's wife. There are plenty of air women digging for gold. At least when I asked 'em, it's what I was told. So I soon took a hand in this digging, you can. And I tried very hard to attract all the men. I saluted quite smartly by winking one eye, but ignored all the airmen unless they could fly.
In Battle of Britain, you heard the voices of Dizzy Allen, Douglas Bader, Paddy Barthrop, Denis Crowley-Milling, Denis David, Boleslav Drobinski, Christopher Foxley-Norris, Roger Frankland, Tom Gleave, Frank Hartley, Donald Kingaby, Brian Kingcombe, Ginger Lacey, Ludovic Martell, Vera Shaw, Bob Stanford-Tuck, John Tanner, Bernard West, Helen Watkinson, and Innes and Bett Westmancott.
A young flight lieutenant was the cause of my fall. So handsome, attractive, and heavenly tall. Took me for a ride in his little MG, when something went wrong with the engine, you see.
The Blitz Diaries were read by Polly March and Jennifer Piercey. The poem For Johnny by John Pudney was read by Peter Howell. Other songs and scenes performed by Edward Arthur, Alison Christie-Murray, Michael Cochrane, Basil Moss, and Gregory de Polnay. The pianist was Bill Mcguffie. Battle of Britain was researched and recorded by Norman Tozer. Technical realization was by Lloyd Silverthorne, and production by Piers Plowright.
Now on my story I will not enlarge, sufficient to say how